So this is Marianne Moenraj. I'm here with Scott Woods. We're at the Parallels Writing Conference in Columbus, Ohio, just held at the Streetlight Guild we're now in November 2019. So I was really delighted that I could ask Scott to sit down with us. I first met him at a writer's retreat where he and I were both working on novels. And at some point I'd love to talk more about his writing, but today I wanted to ask him about his arts organizer work and what he's been doing to help build up Columbus arts culture, really kind of create it. So you've been working here in Columbus for 20 plus years, right, as an artist. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about what it was like when you started in terms of arts culture and what you've been doing.
So, thanks for having me. Columbus, when I started, let me back up. I've always participated in some kind of writing or art or whatever, music. I've always kind of done all the things at the same time. When I started to venture out into the public sphere, I'd say like in the early, mid-90s, there wasn't really any place for kind of break in, low in, learning your craft, black writers to kind of find their way into anything. That all changed in about 96 or 7 when one venue opened up called Snaps and Taps. And it was these 3 guys who used to just throw parties, and they started renting out a building. And they said, well, let's just do this all the time.
Yeah.
And so they asked a friend of mine if she would start an open mic every week. And she asked me to help, and that's pretty much how I got into the game.
Yeah.
And so we've been running that mic still weekly for just over 20 years.
Does it have a name?
The Writer's Block Poetry Night.
Nice.
That's not how it started. We had to learn the hard way to brand and own your name. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it was at Snaps and Taps, but how long was it there?
For the first few years.
Okay.
And then we bounced from venue to venue after that. We are in our most recent venue, Café Kerouac.
Okay.
Which we've been there, I think, about 10 years now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Scott, we're here at a local brew pub, is that fair? In Columbus. And Scott's paying the bill right now, having just taken out his writers for a last lunch before we leave town. So he's a little distracted, but it's my own fault for squeezing in this interview at the end of a long, intense weekend of workshopping that he's hosted. So, all right, there we go. Bill's taken care of.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much.
So it moved from there, and then did it then move again to the Streetlight Guild, or no? There was some more stuff in between.
So basically, after Snaps and Taps, there were 5 other venues before we got to Café Kerouac.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes we would be at a venue for a few months. Sometimes we would be there for a year.
Yeah.
But finally, and there were a lot of years when it was not working.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of lean years, a lot of empty rooms.
Yeah.
Some years it would be great depending on the venue, and then it would die or something would happen.
Yeah.
And finally, I just started to apply all of this math to the situation.
Okay.
Where are we at? What is it that people are really coming here for?
Right.
Are they coming here to be poets?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer largely was no.
Yeah.
It was that they wanted to express themselves.
Right.
And you know that by the turnover rate of the people who are coming, based on the options that they have to go other places. So, for instance, people would show up at open mic for a while, and they might be there for 6 months, a year, and then they would go away, and they wouldn't go to another reading. They would just stop writing poetry.
Okay.
And so you're like, okay, I'm starting to notice a trend here. Half of the people who come out are not long-term writers.
Yeah.
And so I really try to key into the value of the person walking in the door. Mm-hmm. That helped me a lot in terms of turning the show around and making it successful.
Yeah.
And which is something else I had to learn. Right?
Yeah.
It was like, how do I define success?
Right.
Is it a head count? Is it my shows cost $5 to get in? Is it the money?
Right.
Is it the number of poets as opposed to the number of audience? What is the So, and so I had to kind of sit down and do that math for myself.
Yeah, there's a classic thing at sci-fi conventions where if you have a panel and there are more people on the panel than in the audience, you adjourn the panel and everybody goes to the bar and you just have a conversation instead, right? So,
that sounds fair.
Yeah, So it's a constant problem in the arts, and I do think there's a couple things I'm hearing out of what you're saying that made for success is one is persistence, right? Even when the years were lean, you kept doing it and you kept working the problem and thinking it through and just showing up. I think a lot of artists give up. They get frustrated. They're not seeing the success that they thought would come right away, right? And if it's not instant gratification, and maybe even more so in today's world, if you don't get the quick hits, people are like, oh, this isn't for me. And I think we did a lot of research at Strange Horizons about who would submit to us and how often they submitted before they got accepted. We would look at the numbers, and that was the other piece. You looked at the numbers. And one thing we found that other research has shown is that people from marginalized communities, people of color, women, etc., tend to stop much sooner than majority communities. So the white men who submitted to us and got a rejection would, for the most part, submit again and again, and eventually many of them we would end up finding something we loved and publishing it. Women writers, people of color, would often submit once, maybe twice, and then stop. And we didn't know if they were going elsewhere or just not writing anymore, but regardless, they kind of gave up their chance to be published with us, right? And there's some research that sort of shows, like, in some ways it's a survival strategy. If you are in a position where you have limited resources, sure, you assess the situation, you're like, oh, this venue isn't for me, I'll go elsewhere, right? Like, I can't afford to keep trying and not succeeding. But that's like death in publishing, right? Like, you actually have to persist. So
and for me, and I define success now as, the room is packed every week and I don't advertise.
Yeah, that's amazing. Right?
So, but for me, I kind of use the critical mass theory where it's like, if I keep this alive long enough and I get enough unique visitors, if I understand that only a fraction of them are going to show up at the end of the day, 5%, let's say, 4 or 5% of the people who are aware of the show at any given moment, I just have to hit a critical mass number that's so large that the 4 or 5% leaves me with a packed room.
That's right.
And so somewhere along the way, I'd say about 6, 7, 8 years ago, we were in the right venue at the right time and we hit that number. And so now it kind of basically runs itself. Right.
Now once you're a success, right, nothing breeds success like success, right? Then the word gets out and people are like, hey, I want to go to the thing, I can't get in, it's too popular, right?
Well, you have to institutionalize it in a way. But institutionalization requires survival, right? You just have to, it's hard work. Running an event, especially one that's recurring, is brutal work. It's hits on your pocket, it's hits on your time, it's hits on your ego. It's going to cost you your art. So
I know you haven't been writing as much as I would like. I want to read more Scott Woods writing.
Not even close. Opening the Streetlight Guild.
Well, so this is the other thing. It's not just a reading series. So talk about the new space.
So we've been talking about the open mic, which is still at Café Kerouac, right?
Right.
When I opened Streetlight Guild, that is a performing arts venue. It's a 2-floor building that has performance arts space. I'm doing all manner of programming. I'm doing music, dance, poetry, lectures, workshops, the conference, right? And I'm doing that pretty much, I'm pretty much spending full-time hours on that at this point.
Right.
And then the open mic is off to the side, right? It still does its thing, cooking on the back. The question I used to get a lot was, are you going to move it to Streetlight Guild? And I said, absolutely not. The goal is for two things to be happening at the same time and then both succeeding.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So what led you to try to open up Streetlight Guild? It was a process, right? It took a while.
It did. Well, it's interesting. So I've always wanted to have some kind of venue.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't 100% sure what that looked like,
Right.
but space is extremely important to creativity.
Yeah.
As writers, we think, oh, I need to have my desk, my closet, my space where I write, whatever. That's true for culture as well.
Right.
Culture needs a place to learn itself, figure out what it wants to be, it's if you don't have space for that, it can't happen. Not really.
Yeah.
Or it happens under certain restrictions, or it only happens a certain way that's guided by institutions or organizations or whatever, the city, whatever.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's important that there's space for culture to happen at a level that is accessible to people who are just really trying to figure out culture, right?
Yeah.
Or the person who knows how culture should work, but they don't have the space to try something new, right?
Yeah.
So the band that wants to do its original work and not just covers,
Yeah.
to develop an audience, to record something, to figure it out, to try the material. We need spaces like that. And frankly, Columbus didn't have it.
Right. Could you talk a little more about Columbus arts culture? You've been covering a lot you've got a weekly column in the paper?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is not about arts at all, actually,
Yeah.
right? That's just whatever I want to write, and it happens, but as long as it's kind of Columbus facing,
Right.
It doesn't even have to be about Columbus,
Right.
as long as Columbus can derive a lesson from it.
Okay.
So I do that every Wednesday for the Columbus Alive. It's called The Other Columbus.
Okay.
And, initially I had thoughts that it would be a certain way, and now it's just kind of whatever I want to do. So that's kind of in the pot of things. But locally, culture here is a, to use your word, it's fraught, right?
Yeah.
So, Columbus is a fastly developing mid-sized town trying to become a large city, right?
We've got a huge university here.
We do,
right?
Ohio State, but we also have like 10 other universities and schools, not that size obviously, but there are colleges and universities around the city. Right?
Yeah.
Columbus has about 870,000 people,
Okay.
right, in the city proper. In the metro area, it's about 2 million.
Right.
So that's a lot of people who have moved here within, say, the last 30 years, give or take.
Yeah.
And the culture has not kept up with that development, and the development has not historically been interested in culture.
Right. So it's been a lot of business development, or
business and some residential, but it's all obviously gentrification, so it's going up.
right.
Right. So it's kind of destroying the middle, pushing the poor out to the edges, just like it happens everywhere else.
Right.
We do it too. It's a milder version, but it's the same thing.
Right.
But the thing with Columbus is that it's been developing, but without its culture, and now even the city kind of recognizes we need to kind of broaden our cultural base to continue to do the work that we want to do, right? To continue to attract people at the rate that we're attracting. Because ultimately nobody wants to move, nobody within a certain demographic, between 25 and 40 wants to move to a boring city.
No, right.
Right? So, if your city only has one art museum, one classical arts venue, one ballet company, one theater company, that's not compelling, right? And so, not long term.
Right.
There was a time when you could sell it that way, but Columbus has outgrown it.
Right.
And so now the kind of thing that I do is very hot right now.
Yeah.
They want independent, not sure what's going to come next.
Well,
art.
and I'm at a university, and universities can and do a lot for teaching writing, teaching arts, and hosting events. But there's such a different feel to if I go to a writing conference held at my university versus coming to something like what you just did at the Streetlight Guild, right? There's a freedom, there's a different energy, right? And different voices at the table, honestly.
No, and I mean, look, I tell people all the time, I'm in the moments business.
Yeah.
Right? There's things that because I own the space that can happen here that can't happen in other places.
Yeah.
You know, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So just, I'd say like a month ago, I was doing this show called the Harlem Renaissance Remix. I invite local artists to come in and they perform work of Harlem Renaissance art. We basically recreate the Harlem Renaissance for a night. So a teenager had come in, like a 16-year-old writer. It was her birthday. She wanted to see some poetry, which was shocking enough, but she had missed the show.
Yeah.
And so people were still kind of hanging out post-show. And so I just said, you know what? I own the space. Let's fire the mic back up. There's enough poets just in the audience to do a show. Let's do it. And so we threw this show together. So we did like another 30-minute show for this kid's birthday.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it was awesome.
Yeah.
And that you can't do that at a place that you rent.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't do that at the university, you won't even get that kid at the university.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, as a Black artist and writer, you know, what are the specific challenges, but also maybe the opportunities, what is it like? What's it like being a Black artist in Columbus? And maybe in the world as a whole, right? So that's a big question, though.
No,
so
good.
take whatever angle you want.
No, it's cool. Everybody's gonna have a different answer. Here's mine.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not bad right now.
Yeah.
Right? But it took me, 15, 20 years to get to the point where I'm as free to do what I want to do, right?
Right.
So the challenges for me historically have been access, right? I'm also a self-made writer, right? I didn't finish college, I have not done like a bunch of retreats or anything like that. So
which is hilarious because I would totally hire you to come lead one. But okay, but go on.
And I've done them, but it's like as long as you understand going in.
Yeah, but credentialing is, there are all these barriers to credentialing, right?
Sure. And so I'm very much a self-made artist.
Yeah.
Which has been good for me because I love creating, and so I spent a lot of years just plugging away really hard to learn the craft. It didn't hurt to be working in a library full time for 20 years, because you have access to all that knowledge. And I'm one of the people who actually used it. Right? And so, but it was really hard because Columbus just doesn't know. Here's the thing. Columbus kind of lives in a bubble, culturally and artistically, right?
Okay.
And so the beauty of Columbus is that you can find your own voice because you're not largely influenced by a lot of movement or a lot of history. And of course the curse is you're not influenced by a lot of art and a lot of history, right? So, if you are good here, you are either, preternaturally talented or you worked really hard to get good at what you do. And that's not a large pool of people. It's a good size. You can run what I do off of that. Cool. But it's really hard to learn and grow because the opportunities as a Black artist here are not significant.
Right.
Part of that is there were never many Black venues, and largely white venues only book certain types of things. You could be Black and play rock and still not get the rock club gig.
Right. Right.
And then you can't go to the Black club if you don't play Black music, and so now it doesn't matter because all the clubs are gone. Or they are all jukeboxes.
Okay.
Right. So they don't. Getting to play live here is not what it used to be. Campus used to have venues all up and down the street, bars where you could play live. You could do a whole week of shows on campus and then do it again and do it again, and all of those places are gone. And so Columbus just again developed its culture, the artistic culture out of itself, and it's only largely interested in it now because it needs to sell.
So, but there is maybe an opportunity now. It seems like the city is perhaps realizing what it's lost and is looking to.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So yes, it's aware of what it needs, but it's a machine.
Yeah.
It doesn't know how to not do what it does,
Right.
and so it does. It still wants these artists. It wants that quote unquote diversity, right? But it doesn't know how to not do it the wrong way,
Yeah.
right? It still does it the old way. Like, okay, now we need you to do all this paperwork. Now we need you to do this process. We need you to attend these things. We need you to fill this out.
Yeah.
Apply for these grants or die. It's like, yeah, I just want to create. And the machine isn't designed to really absorb artists and culture that it wants without making them do something that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
So, my space says we don't do any of it.
Yeah.
I either have the money to pay you or I don't.
Yeah.
And I have the time and the space. And I have all the things that you need. So let's get the book in.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. They get to come there. I bring an audience. They bring an audience. Somewhere in the middle, the audiences meet, grow, feed each other.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing to own space. Space is so important.
Well, because it enables community, right? I mean, you brought us together this weekend. It was myself, Nick Mamatas, a host of writers who you brought in from out of town, also your fabulous local talent, and then you created this structure where we could talk to aspiring writers, we could hear from them, right? Because there's always stuff to learn from them. They asked fabulous questions that made me think about my own practice and am I doing what I want to be doing as a writer right now? And then we could talk to each other because so often as a writer, you're working in isolation, right? If you make time to read, great, but there is something to the in-person back and forth exchange of ideas and support and yes, stick with it, right? I think you're doing something really interesting, and sometimes you just need to hear that. Right?
No doubt. And look, Columbus has a lot of great talent, but it's not home. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't get a chance to really experience a lot of these hardcore lessons that that the conference and people like you are attempting to teach.
Yeah.
And as you saw, much of the audience for the conference was people of color.
Yeah.
And so they're really trying,
Well, which was fabulous. I mean, most of my audiences at academic conferences and so on are still white.
Right.
And so I actually had to rethink some of the things I typically say because they didn't apply in the same way to your audience, right?
Yeah.
Like I didn't have to give the diversity speech, that was awesome. So,
But they all gotta learn. There's a lot of craft stuff that they need to know.
Yeah.
If they're gonna actually stick in this game.
Yeah.
So, and I wanted to give that to my city.
Yeah.
It's to me, all of these events are a gift.
Yeah.
It's what I wish was there when I was coming up. If I'd have had this, 10 years ago, my novel would be done.
Yeah, I know. That's right. So, well, I wish we had more time. Scott's going to have to take me to the airport soon, but I think I hope we can do this again. I'm going to come back to Columbus next year and do more interviews. But I don't know, just listening to you, I feel like I want to call you Papa Woods and start talking about the Columbus Renaissance, right? We had the Harlem Renaissance. Maybe it's time to start this off,
Not
right?
yet. Ask me in about 5 years.
Well, you're laying the groundwork, right? It's like you're putting down the bones. You're creating this incubator, this space where artists can come together and start to learn from each other, right? And then I don't know. I think some fabulous things are gonna grow and bloom out of this.
So far, so good.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thank you, man.